I recently made a video saying that I sold my Sony A6300, this Sony A6300, to help fund my purchase of the A6500. And if you haven't seen that video, I highly suggest you watch that first because it explains why I even wanted the A6500 in the first place. So today, let's talk about the reasons why I returned it. Reason number one has got to be the touchscreen. If you watched the previous video, I said that the touchscreen wasn't that big of a deal to me. It wasn't one of the reasons why I wanted the A6500, but it did contribute to why I returned it. To me, the touchscreen on the A6500 was poorly implemented. I think because we live in a world where smartphones are so prevalent and they kind of set the standard for touchscreens, when you use it on something that's kind of subpar, you kind of notice it right away. To me, the touchscreen on the A6500 was slow and laggy. When you watch Sony marketing on the A6500, one of the things that they really advertise is the ability to look into the viewfinder, touch the touchscreen, and move it around, and the focus point in the viewfinder would move. In my experience, when you do that, there is a slight lag. When you move your finger in the viewfinder, it doesn't move as fast as your finger. Little things like that just really annoyed me. And the overall tap to focus function wasn't really the best in my opinion. That was still slow. I really hope that this is a firmware thing and Sony can fix it, or else if you're looking for the touchscreen or you want to buy the A6500 because of the touchscreen, look somewhere else. Reason number two is overheating. Let's face it, the A6500 still overheats, and the only reason it records longer in 4K than the A6300 was because Sony implemented in the A6500 firmware a way to let it bypass the high temp warning and just lets the camera ride it out until it gets to pretty much critical point. In the previous video, I said that that was a nice feature to have, and it is a nice feature to have, just because, in my opinion, the A6300 does tend to overheat pretty quickly in 4K. But you gotta think about it in the long run. What is it gonna do to the camera when you're already bypassing the high temp warning and letting your camera run to the point where it's just like it has to shut down because it's so hot? It's hot to the touch. That just makes me a little bit nervous, you know, like when you spend $1,400 on a camera for it to maybe in the long run just overheat too many times and everything is just fried. I'm not really comfortable with that. Reason number three and reason number four is kind of an overall complaint about the A6000 series of camera in general. First complaint has got to be that there is a lack of APS-C lenses. It seems like Sony has not really been paying attention to their APS-C line since they introduced the full frame cameras. So for my uses, there aren't really that many lenses that I am interested in. It seems like there are a lot of zooms, and some of them do seem pretty great, you know, like the 10 to 15, the 16 to 70, or the 18 to 105. But my problem with that is that I do a lot of low light stuff, and most of their primes or most of their zooms are kind of higher in the aperture range. With those three lenses, as I said, they're all f4s, and a lot of Sony zoom lenses are like 3.5 to 6.3. So it doesn't really work for my application. There are a lot of options for fast primes, but my problem is that they're all made by third party. That's all manual lenses. I don't have a problem with using manual lenses, but sometimes when you're doing stuff like this where you can't really like rack focus on yourself, or when you're vlogging, you know, like just holding the camera out, you can't really know what you're doing, or at least you can't know what you're doing with the Sony line of cameras, just because their screens don't really flip out so you can actually see yourself. So at this point, there are really just not that many APS-C lenses that I'm interested in. I actually had to go out and pick up the 16-235 f4 for the full frame just to use on the A6300 because I'm not really ready to commit to the APS-C line of camera and lenses yet. So I wanted to pick up something that I could use on my A7R II that I'm filming with right now too. My final complaint is the overall design of the Sony A6000 series of camera, the A6000, the A6300, the A6500. I just think that they are poorly designed. I say this because it seemed like Sony wanted to design a camera completely around the E-mount, because as you can see, the mount runs along the entire body of the camera. So when you have a lens like this, the 16-35, there's no way of making this lens fit on the A6300 body without the lens protruding and making the whole camera lopsided, essentially. This leads to the next problem. If you use a large tripod plate like this 501PL, something that's standard to almost all video heads, you're not really going to be able to use this with a larger lens that kind of protrude out from the A6300, just because when you mount the plate actually rubs against the lens. Essentially what you have to do is work around the mount and the way that the camera is designed. You can take the plate, push it way back, buy a cage, or buy a battery grip like I did, just so that I can fit the lens and the plate without any problem. All of these solutions kind of have their own drawbacks. If you use the plate and push it all the way back, obviously you're putting more stress onto the mount because there's a huge lens just dangling in the front of the camera. I previously bought the small rig cage and used it on this A6300, but decided not to keep it just because it really didn't work out for my application. Using the cage did allow me to elevate the camera high enough so that the lens would clear, but the problem with that is that because the A6300 is so narrow width-wise, when I would try to mount it onto a video head, some of them are too wide, and this goes back to the design of the A6300. Because it's so low, when you try to open up the battery plate, it would just get stuck on the video head, and you can't remove it without taking the whole camera off of the head. This was just a little bit annoying. We of course move on to the battery grip, which in my opinion, design-wise, works with everything. Works with all video heads, works with all lenses and plates. But the problem with the battery grip is that because Sony, for some reason, put the memory card on the bottom of the camera, and the grip attaches on the bottom of the camera, there's no way of accessing the memory card without removing the entire grip. So this whole process is kind of just annoying and time consuming. As you can see, my complaints are not just particular to the A6500, but the entire line of Sony A6000 series camera. And in honesty, if I already didn't own Sony cameras and lenses, I would have never picked up the A6300. There's just too many quirks that really hinder your workflow. Like I said in the last video, I only paid $600 for this A6300. My situation is a little bit different because I just could not justify the $800 jump to the $1,400 A6500. But if you were brand new to the system and you wanted to get into the Sony APS-C line, you have the choice of the A6300 at $1,000 or the A6500 at $1,400. That $400 gap is a little bit smaller and maybe worth it to upgrade to the A6500. But for me, it just didn't work out. I hope you liked this video, and if it has helped you at all, don't forget to give me a thumbs up, rate, subscribe, leave a comment down below telling me what you think, and I'll see you guys in the next video.